things on their own, even if it's something where they don't need you there every day, but you need to start taking time. Hey guys, this is Josh Nelson with Nelson Elder Care Law. I really appreciate you joining in today. Again, we're going to do this generally every Wednesday at 3 p.m., and we want to answer any kind of topics or discuss things that you're facing, whether or not you're helping a loved one, a spouse, or whether you're a caregiver yourself in a professional manner. There's a lot of things to think about, and we want to walk you through some of those things. Today, we're really going to focus on what we call child caregivers, or even spousal, depending on what your situation is. It can be very, very crazy whenever somebody that's close to you and that you love has some kind of event happen or some kind of diagnosis that makes it so we need to stop what we consider our normal career, especially whenever we're younger in life, and start giving care. It's an amazing, amazing chance to help those that we love. We know that it's hard to see them go through these things on their own, even if it's something where they don't need you there every day, but you need to start taking time off for things like work leave, for doctor's appointments, and just making sure that they're okay, making sure that we check on them. We're going to go over some topics today to make sure that that works well. A lot of times, whenever we start talking about the situation, it's going to be a spouse that's still working or a child that lives nearby that's got to take some time off from their career in order to help their loved one. And whenever we do these decisions, they're big decisions. So let's talk about how we get there from the beginning. Most of the clients that we have come in through some other form, such as their kids giving us a call, or they need to go through some kind of care pattern at a hospital, going to the emergency room because of a fall. These are all things that are unfortunately not planned for. Whenever you start thinking about what happens where somebody needs somebody to come in their house, it's usually unexpected. A lot of people think to call it like old age, but old age is very, very variable. I laugh because I have 6 clients over 100 that always tell me that they aren't old. And in almost everybody else's books, they are. But then I also have my youngest client who's 39 and needs around the clock care. And that's super scary. His wife and his young kids have to cope with that. And because they've lost the income of him not being able to work because of his diagnosis, they can't afford to have professional caregivers come in. And so most of the care is cared for by himself and by his family. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. If you are a child of somebody that needs care, or if you are a spouse of somebody that needs care, how do you structure that in a way to maximize not only your health, also the assets that are involved, and make sure that whenever that care term is over, that you're positioned in a way to be able to join back to the workforce if needed, or that you're taking care of yourself. A lot of times what happens is we'll be in our mid-50s and our parents will get diagnosed with something, whether that's cognitive impairment, a fall, a stroke, something like that. And often the daughter, or even daughter-in-law in some cases that lives close, is the one that takes up the brunt of that care. We start with going to the doctor and checking on things. And whenever we really start thinking about what do we need as far as loved ones and going to the doctor, it's really, really important that you have somebody that accompanies you so that you can hear what's going on. I like to think about whenever my grandmother first started having some health issues, and she went to the doctor, and she came home with a bunch of new prescriptions. And we all asked her, like, what's going on? And she's like, I'm fine. They're just messing with my medicine. And come to find out, she actually had something pretty serious as a diagnosis. And that's just not what she heard. She really did hear that the doctor was just giving her some new medicine. But it was something that we needed to check on. And another time, whenever we got a little bit more involved with it, I laughed because she told me that the doctor told her to quit eating green vegetables. Now, we know that whenever a doctor speaks to somebody, they almost always never tell you, quit eating your vegetables, right? We've learned that ever since a little kid. You got to eat your fruits and vegetables. And so, luckily, I had what's called a HIPAA authorization. And a lot of times, whenever you start at a new doctor, they'll go ahead and have in that little welcome packet what you can fill out. It just allows for you to be able to speak with the doctor. And I call her doctor up and I'm talking to him and saying, what's going on? Grandma's telling me that you told her not to eat vegetables. And the doctor explained that what she really said was, because you have an inconsistent diet, you do really good on salads for a week, and then you switch back over to just desserts and good tasty stuff, then it's causing your blood to fluctuate with thickness. And so we have to adjust the blood thinners based on that. Whenever we start talking about those kind of changes, it was frustrating for my grandmother, and she didn't like going in and having her blood checked. So she decided that meant she needs to quit eating vegetables because out of the two options of quit eating the sweet stuff and just not eating vegetables, she liked the not eating vegetables option better. Again, we're not trying to take over anybody's autonomy or anything like that, but we got to make sure we get the whole story. Personally, a couple of years ago, I had to have my adrenal gland removed. It was a scary time for me. I was really stressed out about it. If a lot of you guys don't know, what your adrenal gland does is it controls your blood pressure. And you have two of them, so losing one isn't a big deal. But my doctor gave me a call after I had a test in the morning and said, I need you to go over to the emergency room and check into Northside because you have something going on with your tests. And I heard that as kind of at your convenience. And I always think it's great in retrospect that I had a doctor that cared because she reached out to my emergency contact and said, hey, I haven't been able to get in touch with Josh because I was still working. I was in with clients helping them do what we do. And she reached out to my emergency contact and said, he hasn't checked himself in yet. And I was really blessed that I had one of those authorizations because whenever she reached out to my emergency contact, she was like, he needs to go right now. And come to find out, I had some internal bleeding that was worrying her. And they admitted me to the hospital and did some surgery. And so it's always good that we have a fresh set of ears anytime we're getting some stressful news or anytime we're talking about our health, especially whenever we're under some stress. If you're caring for somebody with cognitive impairment, it's even more important. And that's why a lot of people start having to take time off to go to the doctors. And eventually, over time, the first thing that you need to do is talk to your employer and make sure that they understand what's going on. If you talk with them, depending on the size of your company, you may be eligible for different kinds of protections. A lot of us have heard of what's called FMLA or the Family Medical Leave Act. Especially with the CARES Act that just passed this year, there's even more protections that protect workers from being able to take some time off. But they only work for companies of certain sizes. Also, sometimes they just won't cover you even if it is caring for a parent or a spouse. Because remember that if a spouse is under your insurance and you lose FMLA to be able to take that leave, a lot of times you lose your insurance or you lose your ability to get those benefits. And if you do that, often you can't go to the doctor anyway. So it puts you in a real predicament. Sometimes just talking with your employer or your manager, making sure that you've worked out a plan to be able to have them understand why you need to work from different remote options or different hours, make up the time that you're missing so that you can keep things going, or just reprioritize things so that you can take a little bit of a part-time or shorter leave than you would otherwise. Especially whenever somebody first starts showing signs that they're going to need care, it's very important that you get a plan worked out because remember, you can't pour from an empty cup. If you're getting stressed out, if you aren't caring for the caregiver, taking care of yourself, you aren't going to be able to help the loved ones that need the help. It's really, really crazy to think about. Even if you have multiple siblings or you have a couple children that have offered to help, whenever push comes to shove, a lot of times it's hard for them to be able to do it. And so often whenever we work with families that are going through a care continuum, it really is the issue that if the spouse or if the child that's helping out loses the ability to do that, they are going to be in a bind, and we're not talking about in-home care anymore. We're talking about going to an assisted living or a nursing home just because we can't afford to pay somebody to come in as much as we would need that spouse or child. Whenever we start talking about that in-home care cost, the average in Georgia ranges between $23 and $25 an hour to have a company come in and do that. Years ago, it used to be cheaper. A lot of times caregivers in the past used to be 1099 or what we call like non-really employees. They were independent contractors. And because of that, companies didn't have to bring them on as staff and pay benefits or unemployment insurance. And so they could do it cheaper. But a couple of years back, the state decided that those have to be W-2 employees now. And because of that, we have to actually pay for benefits, which has raised the cost for everybody. It's really important that whenever we think about that, let's just call it 25 bucks an hour. If we're going to pay somebody to do that, we can run out of money real fast depending on what our income is. The average income for most seniors doesn't support being able to have those caregivers come in. And we know that even if we have great assets, if we don't have income that covers our monthly bills, we are at a deficit and we're going to start running out of money. A lot of times that's whenever a spouse or a child caregiver starts being brought into the picture. And if they do that earlier, maybe even before we have to take time off from work to do it, it can be helpful because we can develop a real plan to walk through those things. If something happens where it is suddenly, again, it's still great to check with your employer. It's great to make sure that you have all these tools so that you have legal authority to help you, a person that needs care, such as a power of attorney, an advance directive for health care. But one of the things that most even attorneys leave out, if you just go to an estate planning attorney or if you just go in asking specifically for these tools, is a caregiver's contract. And so, whenever somebody starts needing care, whenever you have to start taking time off work, whenever you have to start caring for your loved one, especially if you're paying out of pocket for things like medical bills, copays, gas, food, prescriptions, stuff like that, a lot of times children do that and they do it very out of the warmness of their heart. It's a great thing for them to do. They're trying to preserve mom and dad's money or their spouse's money. And it sounds good, but remember that we also need to make sure that we're qualifying people for any government benefits that they may receive. And there are some government benefits out there that you don't get unless you're actually paying for care. Often this is a problem whenever we start talking about VA benefits or benefits that help whenever somebody needs the in-home care or go into an assisted living. If the kids are the only ones paying for care so that they can help preserve mom or dad's money, a lot of times they won't qualify for that VA benefit. And that's pretty scary to think about, that if you've been doing that for months or even years, not knowing what options were available there, it can make a big difference. One of the other things that we always have to focus on is the ability to get paid back, the ability to know what you're really signing up for. And the caregiver contract outlines all that for you. A lot of times whenever we deal with families that have been caregivers for a long time and they went through that process, but their loved one has actually passed now, and they go through probate and they expect to be paid back for not necessarily their time, but just what they've spent on mom and dad. Maybe you had to do a renovation to move mom or dad into your home. Maybe you had to do an add-on room. Maybe you had to do some handy-capable access issues to make sure that the door frames were wide enough, or add grab bars. And those are the kind of things that maybe your parent told you, well, we'll reimburse you that, or we'll make sure that gets carried away later. It's the kind of thing that just doesn't happen from a legal sense unless it's in writing. And I know this is a really difficult concept because we all think that our siblings and everybody's going to do what's right. Remember that sometimes people die without resources. So it's something where they just don't have enough money to pay all their creditors whenever they pass. And so the ones that have the contract in writing are the ones that get paid first. There's different tiers of creditors, and the ones that just have a verbal commitment whenever somebody passes are generally going to go unpaid. It's also important to think about from like a Medicaid perspective. Remember that there's a program called Medicaid that helps seniors or people with disabilities pay for the care they need as they continue to age, even if it's long term for the rest of their life. That program has very, very draconian penalties for gifting away assets. And so maybe you've been taking care of mom at home and she said she's going to, give you some money to pay you back whenever she transitions out of the home into an assisted living or a nursing home. Whenever you do that, if it wasn't written down and expressed in a caregiver contract, that's going to be considered a gift under Medicaid purposes that you're going to have to defend in front of a claims handler and possibly even an administrative judge. Those claims are very, very hard to win and are very expensive to have somebody help you go through that process. Remember, anytime you have actual litigation, it's going to be expensive to have an attorney represent you. A caregiver's contract is luckily one of the things that you can find some free resources online. If you don't feel comfortable with that, they usually only cost a couple $100. And if you're working with an attorney to already do a power of attorney, an advance directive for healthcare, and a will, a lot of times they'll even throw something like that in as long as you have that discussion with them. It's the kind of thing that really protects not only the person that's sick, but also the caregiver. It makes it so that you don't have to fight with your siblings later about taking a little bit of money here and there or using mom's debit card for gas because it was already outlined that she was okay with that. Whenever we start talking about some of the actual payments for care, a lot of people get really uncomfortable with the feeling that their parents would pay them per hour to come do things that they feel they should just do as a loving, caring child. But for the reasons we talked about before, such as Medicaid, government benefits, and avoiding probate, it's still important that that's in the contract and written out. Remember, people that are doing this professionally are getting paid $23 to $25 an hour. And so that's the same kind of rate that we can pay a child caregiver. Now, often what that child caregiver will do is go ahead and take the income from their parent as part of an asset preservation strategy. And they aren't taking that and buying frivolous vacations or upgrading their car. What they're doing with that money is holding it to the side, saying, let's go ahead and get this out of mom and dad's name. Give me a little bit of extra help if I need it, but mainly setting it up so that if mom or dad need it later, because remember, some of those government benefit programs don't provide for everything that you might need. There's going to be limits on the quality of sheets they give you, how nice your pillow is, going to the podiatrist, just little things like that that can really improve somebody's quality of life. That if you have that money kind of squirreled away, you can always pull back out of. If you haven't squirreled that money away, then it's going to be the spouse or the kids having to dig deep to come up with that. And often we find that the children or the spouse just aren't in a position to be able to do that, even though they so desperately want to. And so by doing a caregiver contract, using that money in a savings account or however you want to invest it, but really squirreling it away so that whenever mom or dad need it later, you aren't having to pull from your own funds. You're just re-gifting back to them what they need. It can really help out from the perspective of their quality of life. Ultimately, one of the things that we find is that caregiving is one of the hardest jobs you'll ever do. Like we discussed before, it's really important that you take care of yourself if you are a caregiver. And sometimes things like even going for a massage, going out for a nice dinner, maybe taking a weekend away are things that people are hesitant to do. Not only because if you had to quit your primary job in order to be the caregiver, your funds are a little tighter than they were before, but also people feel guilty about it. But again, I want to reiterate that you have to take care of yourself if you're the caregiver, because if something happens to you, there aren't usually a whole lot of people in line behind you that are willing to step up and do that. Again, you can use some of that money that you've done through the caregiver contract in order to be able to set up a nice weekend with your spouse. It's really important to remember that if you're caring for a parent, that's your parent. It may not be your husband or wife's parent. And so to them, even if they love them dearly, it's still an in-law. And you want to make sure that they aren't losing their wife or husband over that, because it can cause a lot of stress. Unfortunately, we see a lot of caregivers that end up going through divorces at the end of the care continuum just because it's been so stressful. We know that they still love each other. We know that they can make it work, but sometimes having a parent move in with you or having to move in with them is the kind of thing that can cause a lot of stress on a relationship. Squirreling some of that money away, being able to go on a date night, using that money to get a paid caregiver whenever you need to do that. Something as simple as going out and getting a nice massage for 40 or 50 bucks can really make a difference in the caregiver's life and their ability to continue giving the great care that they want to. Sometimes it's really important to get away from stress. So just going out for a nice dinner, maybe it's with friends, maybe it's with your spouse, just something to have a good time is really a good way to refresh that. And then ultimately, depending on your age, it's something where you have to really focus on, are you going to re-enter the workforce whenever this caregiving period's over? A lot of times, we find that people over the age of 40 have a really hard time finding a career path again. One of the things a lot of people don't realize is with employment law, age discrimination is actually for older ages and not younger ages. So it really starts for protections of people over age 40, not younger people. And that's crazy to think about. But a lot of the companies aren't looking to bring somebody on right before they retire. And so we have to make sure that as a caregiver, you're staying up with the skills and that you're keeping your resume polished up. There are people out there that can definitely help refresh your resume, especially if it's been a few years since you had to change jobs. And it's important that you do this even whenever you're in the caregiver role, because it makes it so that whenever that period of your term is over, you go back and you can still be successful. Remember that the people that you love and care for also love and care for you. And so they want the best for you. They don't want to be a burden to you. They want you to have a great life afterwards. And they would want this for you too. So you got to have a little bit of balance. You got to make sure we're being safe, getting the care they need. But you really got to take care of yourself too. And the ways you do that are by having the powers of attorney, the legal directives, the wills in place in case somebody does pass. Adding a caregiver agreement into that can really go a long way with keeping you and your siblings from fighting, making sure that government benefits are still protected, and then ultimately, at the end of the day, everybody walks away from this with as least amount of stress as possible. There's nothing that a lawyer can do that removes all the stress. This is still a crazy time. There's a lot to go for when you're a caregiver. You need to work with somebody that recognizes the stress you're under and that this is probably one of the hardest times of your life, but also that can help equip you so that whenever this period of your life's over, you still go have a great quality of life and are successful like you want to be. Any questions today, Amy?
No, but we did drop some great resources in the comments for caregivers to take care of themselves.
Yeah, and again, right now, guys, because of the virus, there's a lot of caregiver groups that aren't active that will come back. We know that it's really hard whenever you don't have a support group. A lot of people have a stigma about going to a support group. I want to really, really caution you against feeling that way. Whenever you go and you talk to other people that have been where you're at, but have worked through it, they can give you tips and tricks and great ideas to be able to make sure that this isn't something that you have to figure out on your own. You're not the first person to ever be a caregiver for a spouse or a parent. There's a lot of people that do this. Sometimes you can learn some great tips and tricks from them, and sometimes it's just a place for you to go have a break, get some relaxation, have a little bit of reprieve from being a caregiver. But I highly, highly recommend you to find out a group, whether it's somebody through your church, somebody through senior services. There's a lot of great events out there. Some are virtual right now, but whenever they do come back, it will make a big difference. All right. Thank you for joining us, guys, today. If you have any topics that you want us to cover, feel free to shoot us a message. Otherwise, we'll see you soon.